Y'all want to see Raven before she started talking so candidly about using a strap-on? In 1970, many high schools stopped sponsoring proms when they were asked to integrate. Instead, there were two privately funded proms, one for blacks and one for mayonnaise. In the early 2000s, senior students in Mercier, Louisiana are all excited for the upcoming prom. They'll have two. Brianna and her friend Sella are part of the committee, and they are both busy finishing their tasks. One early morning, young lovers Carla and Myron are caught by Mr. Macon doing extracurricular activities in the car, and he immediately takes them to the principal's office. Brianna sees the commotion, but Mrs. Howard tells her to not get involved. On her way out, Mr. Mark Manning asks her to tutor Brandon, a varsity player. Brandon is not doing well in class, and if he fails, he can't be allowed to play. As soon as Brianna hears Brandon's name, she gets all giddy.
Brandon Williams?
Oh, you nasty.
While preparing for the big event, students Kelly, Sella, and Ely realize that there's not enough money to afford the prom they want. Brianna suggests they have just one big prom since they want the same DJ anyway. It's cost-effective. Somewhere in New Orleans, Desiree Howard works as a writer for a newspaper, but she's been working there for a year, and her boss, Randall, still keeps giving her work fit for an intern. He has yet to see her potential. So Desiree submits her resignation, but Randall reminds her that she has a contract, and all he can do is let her take a vacation. One morning, the students learn that Myron gets suspended. Brianna asks Mrs. Stevens for an explanation, but the principal insists that she made the right decision based on the circumstances. Oh yeah, suspend the black student, but not the white girl. Brianna can't stop thinking about having just one prom, so Sella tells her to make a pitch to Shannon, the one in charge of the white prom. To Sella's surprise, Shannon agrees. In her first tutoring session with Brandon, Raven is ready to throw hands because Brandon is just not getting the material through his thick skull. He'd rather dance, but then Brianna's Aunt Marlene walks in and asks Brandon to leave. It turns out that the whole town already knows about what happened to Myron. Aunt Marlene warns Brianna not to get involved and instead focus on getting good grades. To finalize their prom, the seniors hold a meeting. Since it's a private party funded by students, they don't need the school's permission. So they start voting, and the majority wants to have an integrated prom.
If we vote no, you're gonna say we're racist, right?
Yes, a racist who smells like sauerkraut. The majority agrees that they should have one prom, but Ms. Kit Kat Clan is pissed.
We're gonna have two proms like we always do.
Desiree calls her mother to check on her. She hasn't visited in a long time, but now she finally decides to come home. Right after a church service, Mrs. Little from the NAACP is given a chance to address the parents. She asks everyone to attend the PTA meeting to show support to the Dawsons in regard to Myron's suspension. On top of that, they have to discuss the integrated prom. The service is already over by the time Desiree gets there. They visit her brother Russell at the cemetery, and to her surprise, she sees an old friend of hers, Mark Manning. Mark admits that he came home after his mother got sick and decided to stay for good. The spark between the two is evident as her kitty starts to purr, but Desiree is quick to decline Mark's dinner invitation. On their way home, Mr. Howard's car gets hit by another vehicle. Mr. Howard tells the sheriff that a Dupree girl was driving the other car. The sheriff asks for his license and registration and says he'll look into the matter first because he knows the girl's father. Though Desiree finds it unfair, her father tells her to back off. God just creates anyone. Let's just say that. Brandon doesn't understand why a party is that big of a deal to Brianna. Even though he's friends with Myron, he doesn't think having meetings to discuss the problems will change anything for them. Desiree hears about the seniors' plan for an integrated prom. Wanting to know more about it, she volunteers to drive her mother to school, and they both sit in the PTA meeting. The suspension issue is brought up by Myron's parents. They think it's not fair that Myron got suspended and Carla didn't. They strongly believe that it has something to do with Carla's father, Bob Thornton, being on the city council, or maybe because Carla is mayonnaise. The principal explains that Carla and Myron both received their punishment, but Myron was suspended because he pushed Mr. Macon when the teacher was taking him to the principal's office. As for the prom, Bob insists it's not something to be discussed during the PTA meeting. So, Mrs. Little suggests they create a parents' committee to look into the matter. Brianna tries to speak up, but they quickly cut her off. However, she grabs Desiree's attention, and the reporter asks her for a chat. Desiree went to the same high school 14 years ago, and the seniors back then also had 2 proms. But Brianna is determined to have just one. She promises that it's going to be the best prom in their high school's history. Desiree admires the girl's determination and can't help but root for her. Later that night, Desiree gets in a heated exchange with her father. He calls her ungrateful for never being satisfied with anything and compares her with her late brother Russell, who died of sickle cell. Who needs haters when you got a father like this? To get some funds for the prom, Brianna and the seniors launch a car wash event. However, some parents end up picking up their kids because they don't want them participating. Brandon and his friends show up to lend a hand. Then he reveals that Myron had been receiving threats since the integrated prom became a hot topic. Brandon doesn't understand why prom is so important to Brianna and why she doesn't even think of compromising. Now that everyone's talking about the prom, Desiree meeting Mark for lunch has become something to gossip about as well.
Speaking of hoochie, guess who just walked in?
Mark assures Desiree that people are talking only because of how beautiful she is. Desiree is worried about Brianna, but Mark tells her that Brianna knows what she's doing. Because the prom issue has gotten out of hand, parents of the white kids hold their own meeting at the Thorntons' residence. Bob swears he's not against integration in school because that's exactly the reason they are winning in sports. The black butler gives the palm-colored people the look. Bob insists that Mercier has always had 2 proms for as long as he remembers, and that there must be a good reason for it. They think that the students are just rebelling after Myron got suspended. Mark has to listen to all the complaints, but when the conversation slowly becomes racist, he leaves the room immediately.
Lie down with dogs. Get up with fleas.
And no one wants your chopped bangs. At school, Brianna notices how the students are now taking sides. Even black students have become mean to Carla. They think that she's the hoe that got Myron suspended. Brianna can't believe there's now a division between all her friends. But Sela admits that even she blames Carla for what happened to Myron. One day, a white student flirting with Carla confronts Myron for staring. The situation quickly escalates, and Brandon has to stop his friend from getting into a brawl. The way Brianna looks at Brandon has me dead. She nasty. Meanwhile, Mark Manning and Desiree go on a second date. It all starts so well until Desiree mentions how Mercier is still a racist little town. She mentions how a huge portion of land is owned by white people and how most of those in jail are black. Realizing that she's ranting to a very nice friend, she quickly apologizes. Girl, don't apologize for speaking truth. Mark says there are people in town who are working hard to change things, but then they notice the neighbors staring at them, prompting Desiree to say goodbye. Mark stops her, and they make cookies and cream. Later that night, Desiree contacts someone and shares the story she wants to write. It's about the school prom in Mercier and Brianna. The next day, Mrs. Stevens calls Brianna to the principal's office and shows her the newspaper. She is disappointed because the article has made it look like the school is promoting segregation. Brianna swears she didn't talk to any reporter and that she's also surprised her face is on the front page. Because the press is on their way, Mrs. Stevens decides to send Brianna home. Brianna knows that it was all Desiree's doing, and she doesn't want to talk to her anymore. Mark sees the two, and he approaches to confront Desiree. He asks her if she's too afraid to put her name on the paper, which is why she had the story printed on the Associated Press. Desiree is not ashamed of what she did because she believed it had to be done. But Mark is disappointed because it ended up shaming the entire town, telling Desiree to go back to New Orleans. Miss Girl, that should have given you the ick. Even Bob Thornton talks to the principal and asks her to make a move. He wants to do damage control, and Mark suggests having one prom will fix everything. But Mr. Tonsilstones disagrees. Desiree goes to Brianna's house and apologizes. She admits she wished she was as brave as Brianna when she was her age. Brianna confides in her aunt and says she should have listened to her. So Marlene reveals that Brianna is a descendant of Ernest Armstrong, the first black man who cast a vote in Louisiana. But he was lynched. She encourages Brianna to keep going. Randall calls Desiree and orders her to stay and cover the prom because she's now a front pager. All eyes are on Brianna. Carla wants her dues back because her father told her that there's only going to be a whites prom. Things get out of control as everyone criticizes Carla.
White hoe!
The principal walks in on them and calls Brianna to her office. She tells Brianna to make the right decision for everyone and that is to have the traditional 2 proms. The white hoe even threatens Brianna that she might lose her valedictorian status if this continues. But Brianna is defiant. She announces that the right thing to do is to have one great prom, but students are not having it, and one by one they approach her, asking for their dues back. Later that day, Brianna admits she wants Desiree to write her story. Mr. Howard tells Desiree that her actions have caused problems in town, especially at the school where Mrs. Howard works.
And the niggas in Mercier don't want trouble.
Desiree reiterates that the cop isn't going to arrest the girl who hit his car, even though he believes the cop is looking into it. Desiree refuses to back down and practically tells her father that he's a coward for always playing nice. Mrs. Howard butts in and tells Desiree to apologize. At school, Mrs. Howard tells Mrs. Stevens that as a principal, she should let her voice be heard. After classes, Brianna admits she's worried she'll never be a valedictorian because of the prom issue. Brandon tells her that there's never been a black valedictorian at Mercier. Then he asks her to be his date. She starts dancing, and all I can see is Raven Baxter. Brianna's happiness is short-lived because that night she's bombarded by multiple calls from parents and students asking for their dues back or saying they are not going to attend anymore. Meanwhile, there are some people who broke into the school and ruined the prom decorations.
Oh, snap!
Brianna takes responsibility for the vandalism and says she only wanted a memorable prom and it wasn't her intention to create a problem. But that short speech has changed the students' minds, and Carla hands her the prom dues from herself and other students. As for Desiree, she tells Mark they should just remain as good friends.
Is it the white thing? Because I could tan.
So that's crazy. It's the wrinkles and that nasty mole. Just before the prom, Desiree finds a book with all her past writings. It turns out that her father has been keeping them. Mr. Howard admits that he has always loved his kids, and Desiree can't help but be happy to get her father's approval. The night of the big day, and it's announced that Brianna is valedictorian. Desiree gives her a necklace as a gift. Reporters are already waiting at the venue, and after sharing their first kiss, Brandon lets Brianna have the spotlight all to herself. Then one by one, the seniors begin to arrive. It's a night to remember, and everyone is having fun. Bob Thornton wants to drag Carla out of there, but Desiree warns him that there are reporters outside. Bob calms his fat tits, saying it's only for one night. The next year, they vote for one prom again, but a group of white students decides to return to having the traditional 2 proms. I cannot believe this was all based on a true story. That's wild that this happened no more than 30 years ago. That's insane. What did y'all think of this one?
If you like this video, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications because YouTube isn't recommending my videos. So, if you like to watch more foolishness, you can click here or here.